You okay?
Lizzie is
we're beginning. Okay, so hi everybody, welcome back to Total Bollix. This is, if anyone who doesn't know, Total Bollix basically means absolute chaos. That's what that phrase literally means, which is kind of why I love it so much. So each month we have a different prompt, and I'm just going to quickly introduce our hosts so that we can go straight in on the fuck the patriarchy prompt this month, because I am so excited, because I know that some of us loved our books and others not so much.
Yeah, I was going to say fuck the patriarchy and also apparently everybody's choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have Lizzie from Bombadil Bookish. Finger guns.
I have a lot of respect for Lizzie's slump right now.
Genuinely, earlier, Lizzie was like horizontal and was like, "Can I do the live like this?" And I was like, "No, no, you cannot. Sit up." We've got
bare minimum, guys. That's what I'm getting. The bare minimum.
That's the slogan for life. Mm-hmm. My life goals, the bare minimum.
Hannah from Bookworms Feast. Abby from Abbey of Pelennor. We've got Celine from Stuff Celine Does. And we've got Leanne from Literary Diversions and Novel Menagerie, depending on where they find you.
Yeah. You know, I answer to pretty much anything these days, so
that's valid. And obviously I'm also Hannah from Ladder M. Now I've done full-on overlays because I decided I was going to be extra. And I also said, Leanne, that you could go first, just in case you need to scalp her later, which is absolutely fine. So what book did you pick for Fuck the Patriarchy?
Well, as a true overachiever, I picked 2 books.
Nice.
Because I chose one non-fiction and I was like, there's a good chance that I'm going to hate everybody and everything when I read this book. And so I have to sort of like pad it out with something else. So I then did a reread, which felt very safe, but actually just made me more angry. So it didn't quite have the desired effect. So the first one that I went with, I don't even want to hold this up because it just, I've got Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. So Laura Bates, in case anybody doesn't know, started the Everyday Sexism Project, which was a project on Twitter where she got anybody from any gender, background, anything, to tweet in their experiences with misogyny. And this went crazy and it was compiled into a book, and she has since written other books. And this one specifically deals with incels and the idea of men's rights activists, and sort of the idea that although her entire career she has been bringing forth this message that actually there's a lot of toxicity left to unpick, she's still censored when she goes on to places. So like if she goes on Channel 4, she can't talk explicitly about some of the messages that men send her online. And so the whole idea is about the idea that actually we're still complicit, even in forums where we call out the idea of men hating women, we're still complicit. So I went with that, and I'm not gonna lie, I've still got, I didn't dog ear. Like, can I have praise, please? There was no praise there. I did not dog ear. I found it myself. Right, so I've still got like this much to go because this is intense, like real intense. And I hate a lot of things now, more than I did before. I balanced it out with a thriller wherein men die. So I felt like that was. I felt like that was good. This is like, nobody talks about this, and it makes me real sad because it's one of those books that's kind of like coded into my DNA now, because I've read it so many times, and I feel like, you know how when you're in a book forum like BookTube or whatever, you start to get your little synopses down pat for when you sell your favorite books. I feel like this is one of those that I'm probably talking about in my sleep. So this is Dead Girls by Abigail Tartellin, and it's set in the 90s, and it is a creepy child protagonist, which is very in my wheelhouse, and her best friend is murdered, and she decides that the police are not doing enough to try and investigate where her best friend went. And so she decides that she's going to investigate, and it's very that hazy time in the 90s between not really caring about what tiny children are doing during their day and helicopter parenting. And there's no internet, there's no accountability. It's very much like, come in when the lights go out. And she makes choices, and very many people die, and I love her. It's the complete antithesis of this, in which I love nothing and nobody.
So Dead Girls is going straight on my TV.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm literally
that's what I was doing.
I had to reduce my chat about that there, because I was like, this whole hour is just going to be me being like, please read that back.
I mean, that's understandable. So I make a real point to put a list together after every live show, so I can like put them on my shop and also order them in for myself. And I was like, okay, Dead Girls immediately, like straight on the list.
It's so good. And there's also like, I feel like it's one of those really good bridge from any genre books, because it kind of feels a little bit literary fiction, feels very thrillery, but there's some like tiny horror and fabulism elements in there where you're like, is this kid just not okay? Or are there actually other things going on in the background? And it's never really answered. And it's one of those, I wonder if I can recreate it, but I have read this book so many times that the actual cardboard bit that attaches it to the binding is no longer attached anymore.
Amazing.
And it's because I got to the last 20 or so pages, and there's me just like, oh my god, I love this book. This is going to be the best book ever. And then a final twist happened that I did not see coming, and I choked on my own spit and broke the spine at the same time. And I was like, oh! And it's destroyed, but I've glued it back together, so it's fine.
That is well loved.
You just went from like reading it. I've had that happen on some hardbacks just because I've read it so many times. I was not expecting choke on spit break book.
Yeah, I did one of those like wheezy inhales that, like, I imagine if you sat on a guinea pig, it would make the same noise. And it was painful, and I damaged things. But I've repaired it. It's possibly the most beaten up book in this library that hasn't had cat injuries, to be perfectly honest. And it's like, it's on my reading list for life. I will sell it to everybody. It's like kind of like Spice Girls and murder.
Oh, sold.
Why did you not start with that?
Yeah.
I had to start with this so that we could get it out of the way and never talk about men again.
I think it's really interesting because I know obviously Abby and I also read non-fictions, so it's going to be really interesting. Like, I do find that when I pick up a non-fiction, if it is about anything anti-patriarchy or feminist, I do come away being like, the world is awful. Like, just like generally like,
I have no hope and everything is bad.
Yeah, that is exactly how I came away from my non-fiction, but I liked it more than my fiction pick. I rated it higher. More accurately, I came away from it being so angry and fed up with the world, but my fiction pick was a bit of a letdown. Not in the feminism side, just in the actual book.
Okay, so the message that I got just before I got here was like, many people did not enjoy their book, and I was like, give me all of the salt, all of me, so it may restore me.
We will get there. Yeah. Is there any questions we've got for Leanne about Leanne's pick? Otherwise, I'm ready to hear Celine's saltiness as well. Because, like, don't get me wrong, like, the moment you were like, yeah, men die in this, I was like, sign me up. I've got like Foul is Fair on my shelf somewhere, which is like a Macbeth retelling, but it's a bunch of girls getting back at the boys who've been like sexually assaulting people, and I'm like, yes, good for her. Like, I really want more good for her books, you know.
Oh my God. Yeah, I have to admit, like, on top of Dead Girls is one of those like little niche genre things that I have, where I have like a cross section of interests that just all happen to be in one book. And I have like, and I will give you it afterwards so that you can maybe put it in the show notes or whatever, but I've got like a list of recommendations just based on the men die and it was the creepy child who did it thing. So
yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, like,
there's more. There's more.
You found your target audience.
I'm going to
lists and fuck the patriarchy.
Oh yeah,
this is your target audience.
I like this.
Ali, you're having a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you describe it as good?
Okay, so I'm on the fence about Laura Bates's delivery in general, and I would say okay, so I always give people everyday sexism as if you're starting off with any kind of feminism or unpicking your ideas of the patriarchy and misogyny, etc., this is a good place to start. I would say that from that, this is like an advanced place. But if you have done any work on your own, if you are a reader who picks up a lot of like feminist materials and stuff, there's not a ton in here that I didn't already know. That being said, one of the things that she's done in this, because she talks a lot about being censored, is she leaves in a lot of the messages that she has been sent by men and incels and stuff like that over the time that she has been posting on the internet. And it's very arresting and very effective, because I think there are a lot of the time, even in books that address the subject, they don't necessarily show the source material. And that was something about everyday sexism that I found like there's some things in that really stuck with me. And this is exactly the same. So from that perspective, I say it's still worth it, even if you feel like you're quite advanced in your feminism, but at the same time, it's very accessibly written, but because of that, sometimes she repeats her points. And in Laura Bates' writing in general, I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, we can move on now. Yeah.
Can we? Yeah. So I like it as much as we can like a book about incels. But yeah, I have caveats, I guess.
That's fair. I'm definitely adding it to my list because I think it's considering it's talking about the same topic, it's very different from the non-fictions I read, and mine were very, very dense. And I think I needed something that was a bit more gentle. I didn't read a lot in March in general, so the fact that it was like these two very, very textbook-like non-fictions may have had something to do with that. That and the fact that I'm like 100 pages off the end of a 700-page book as well. Like those are the three things I worked on this month, and I'm just like I'm struggling.
Do we get to know what the 700-page book is?
So it's not full. It's like 627, but it's the other Bennett sister. It's Pride and Prejudice Retelling.
Unread.
I'm so curious to hear about what you think of the Angela Saini books that you've read, Hannah, because when I picked up another Angela Saini book, Superior, you told me, like, you warned me, I guess, that it's kind of textbook-like in her writing style. I did not find that at all. I found it like really easily digestible, quite easy to read. Like the topic isn't easy, but the actual writing style I thought was really nicely done. It didn't come across as textbook to me.
I think it's because she's a scientist before she's a writer. So I think there's an element of that. Everything has evidence. I will get to it in a bit, but yeah, I think that would be interesting to talk about anyway, because I think you and I, with our different backgrounds, it will make a difference in how we perceive it anyway. Okay, cool. In which case, let's move on to the salty Celine bit. I'm so excited because I know it's not like
Celine. Can salty Celine be your like subtitle forever now? That's great. I love that.
You know what? Go ahead. I don't even mind it. Go ahead. I'm so disappointed, for real. I really am, because I really wanted to enjoy this book. So I picked Electra by Jennifer Sand, which is the mythology retelling. As with pretty much any mythology retelling starring a woman, it's supposed to be kind of like feminism story. It is to some extent, but I still didn't enjoy it at all. I don't even know where to start. So you would think that the book is about Electra. It is not. It's a little twist. So we are following three different characters, Clytemnestra, Cassandra, and Electra. Though we have very, very little of Electra. It's mainly, I would say, Clytemnestra, which I'm sad about because I just bought another book just about her. So, It's plot twist is actually about Electra.
Yeah.
So what would you say?
She said plot twist is actually about Electra.
Maybe. I will tell you soon. But yeah, the writing felt really shallow, if that makes sense. I feel like with mythology, you have the chance to write very complex and layered characters. Like you can pretty much do whatever you want with them. They can be very dramatic because mythology. They can be tortured, complex, whatever. Yeah, you can lean into any kind of characters you want. It felt very shallow. It felt very light. The writing is okay. It's not bad in itself, but it's not amazing either. It felt more like kind of like short stories collection, kind of. It's also very fast paced. So we are starting when Clytemnestra is young, and from then we just follow the lives of those three women that are kind of like intertwined at some point. And they all are interesting in their own ways. I don't think it was a good idea to have those three women all at once. I think they all deserved their own storylines, like very separate from each other. And I felt like it was just too short every time for each and every one of them. We do have, I guess another tone of feminism and like forget the patriarchy and everything, but it's not really that much about that. What I keep in mind at the end of the book is that it's more about Electra being mad at her mother than everything else. So it's kind of like counter feminism-ish.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, actually, because I feel like the Greek myth retellings, I mean, it's such an oversaturated market at this point. And so many that I've picked up in the last sort of 6 months have read like short story collections that have been vaguely cobbled together with the plot. And it's like style over substance. And I'm like, but I want a character study, and what I got was like broad strokes.
It's exactly that. I don't know much, if anything, about mythology, so I go very blind into it every time. Like I had no idea about any of those characters at all. I remember the story of Troy from the movie with Brad Pitt. That is all. And I watched that 20 years ago when I went into the movie, even like maybe older than that. So I know nothing. So you can just impress me basically, because I know shit about that. But no.
I do wonder if that's like a hangover, like what you're saying about it being like an anthology thing from 1,000 Ships doing so well. And I feel like you're saying, with like it being a really saturated market, one of the things I don't mind about it being such a saturated market is so many of them now focus on the female gaze, and a lot of them center women or non-binary characters that are kind of not like left at home, but have their own stories to tell. And one that I really wanted to pick up, but just didn't get time to, was the Pat Barker Women of Troy, and what's the paperback I've got? I've got like another one that's like the first one of that, because I feel like again they're centering female voices, which they existed. Like women in those eras existed, but so many of the myths center men. And I feel like Natalie Haynes, I've read quite a few, and I know obviously Hannah that you're going to be talking about Natalie Haynes anyway. Loads of like male classicists are really anti Natalie Haynes because they focus so hard on these are the female characters, and these characters, they have these moments and that kind of thing. So even just the fact that it's a female-centric story is kind of... Go on, Lizzie.
So my uncle is a Greek scholar.
Oh.
And he's also of an age. And my favourite thing to do whenever I see him is to bring up Natalie Haynes. Just to watch him try and... Because he knows by now that I'm going to say something to get his back up. But I'm also like, tell me I'm wrong.
Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah,
come on. But no, Natalie Haynes is a good one, and Madeline Miller as well. But my uncle, he gets his back right up, because I'm just like, yeah, ancient Greek myths were kind of misogynistic, and it's just like little things I'll just throw at him just to kind of challenge him. And sometimes he fails spectacularly, but it is a fun one.
Wait him, watch him go.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, like, with the patriarchs, what I read, Hesiod's Theogony comes up quite a lot. Like the idea of being like where patriarchy comes from. And it's like, even in like this Greek literature, Hesiod clearly hated women. And Angela Saini at one point describes him as frothing at the mouth. He's like so angry that there are these like female characters, and like he's so anti-women. And I was like, because I've read Hesiod's Theogony because I'm that guy. And I was like, I did not notice that. Like I expected the misogyny, but it wasn't like, I didn't read into it into like that deep thing, but it is there. Like, she's absolutely right. So I think it's
I guess
really
because we see it in, I was going to say everything, given how focused we are on women in fiction. But yeah, we see it in everything in general society. You see misogyny baked in. I mean, my one talks about that quite a lot, my non-fiction. So it's a lot easier, I think, for us to like read a male author, especially one like published a while ago, even like 30 years ago, and like see past the misogyny versus someone who is a misogynist reading a book that has feminist tones in it, and they can't see past the feminist to still try and enjoy it because they've never had to, because they've never had such an oversaturation.
I'm desperately trying to find the title. So I'm a bit of an Antigone nut, and I did a lot about Antigone and the myth at uni. And I read a retelling very recently. I will find it and give it to you for your list. But I read a retelling very recently, which basically took all of the king's speeches, which in the original are these big, wordy, like diatribes against the ideas of women and why women think that they should have a voice, and she reduced it down to speedboats, money, and prestige, and she kept reducing his paragraphs in each little speech to be just this little line until it was like, no, let's strip away all the things that you're saying and this is what you want. It was so clever, and I was like, couldn't we have just given that to every professor I ever had? Just that.
I need that. I need it. Please find it published.
I resisted the incredibly ADHDers to just disappear and run and get it from my bookcase, but I will give you the name afterwards.
I love that. I love that. Is there another Greek retelling, Celine, that you would recommend over Electra? Because I don't think you mentioned, but you gave Electra 2 stars.
Yeah, like probably a 2.25 maybe. No, I've only read Circe and Ariadne, and no.
Fair enough. Because like I love Circe, but Lizzie's straight up DNF Circe, so
they were no more than 3 stars. They were fine. They were okay, but they weren't exceptional.
Okay, I DNF'd Circe, but I also was in a really bad mood and a bad place. I feel like I might be in a better position to enjoy Circe.
To justify it,
I'm leaving this live show with so much respect for Lizzie. I was in a bad mood.
Yeah. No, my mood really does affect it, but I enjoyed Ariadne quite a lot. It's I think it's because I forgot Ariadne's story, whereas I knew Circe better. So I think that's where it kind of why I enjoyed Ariadne more, because I was like, oh, I forgot that this was a thing. Like
not knowing about any of those 2 female characters, I preferred slightly Circe than Ariadne, which makes sense because apparently Jennifer Sand isn't for me. But they were like maybe 3 stars, 3.5 stars, just nothing to write home about. So
yeah, it's a shame you've pre-ordered a talent where it's called Atlanta.
But like I have so many other mythology books on my shelves, and now I'm like, I will never read any of you. I'm scared.
No.
They're not all the same. I promise, they're not all the same.
And on the other hand, they're very pretty.
They are very pretty.
I will have a pretty shelf of just mythology books for sure.
Well, someone in the comments has put about stone blinds. So I'm gonna throw
this was
because
I was hesitating between Electra and Stoneblind, but like since Hannah was already picking Stoneblind, I was like, I'm gonna go with Electra.
I wasn't going to talk about it, but it kind of is why this didn't get 5 stars from me, because this did get 5 stars from me. Ooh. But because I read them so close together, and this being more non-fiction, it suffered for that because I read Stoneblind first.
Yeah.
So have we moved on now? Just
before your name's at the bottom there, so you crack on.
Okay. Sorry, I freak out. Okay. I did write a review, so hopefully I will remember more, but already no. So I read Pandora's Jar, which is by Natalie Haynes. And it talks about 10 women. I'll read out who they are. I'll probably butcher their names because I don't know how they're actually pronounced. So you got Pandora, Jocasta, Helen, Medusa, the Amazons, Clytemnestra, Eurydice, Phaedra, Medea, and Penelope. And I really, really enjoyed them. It turns out that actually there's quite a few stories from like ancient Greece where women did have a stronger voice, and it's kind of been stripped away over time. So I found that sort of really interesting to find out. Probably going to butcher his name as well, but Euripides. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he did a lot where it's like the female voices like really shone through. And there's even like one mention like Hesiod. I'm probably saying that wrong again. I can't remember who it was against, but like there was even one where he even had the more positive light for once, and all that's just been ignored as well. I think it might have been with Pandora. So it's like it was very interesting to like learn all that, because I didn't know a lot of that. I've always assumed like all the retellings were just completely made up out of the blue to try and be like, oh well, these women existed, we don't know anything about them, let's give them a voice. Where it's like actually they kind of did have a voice at one point a lot of the time, or at least more of a voice of what they've got in the more modern retellings, and it's just kind of expanded on with a lot of these like even more modern retellings, I guess. Because when I say modern retellings, that was like anything from like Tudor England to so like the 1950s was quite a common one as well. It sounds like there was a lot of mythology around then. But yeah, no, there was some of them I didn't really know much about, like Medea. So that was really interesting to read about as well. I really need to read more on her, because I didn't know it. Like I've just said I didn't know anything about her and repeat myself. So I start freaking out. But so she's related to Jason's stories, and I had heard about like Jason and the Argonauts film, and had seen like little snippets of it, but I didn't realize that actually Medea is who does a lot of the things that he takes credit for in these retellings that have happened since. So like I want to read more about her, even though I also now know how her story ends, and it's not a good one, even in the best of lights you could give it. You can't really give it a good light. But I need to read a retelling of that.
I know that. Mid that literally every single one of our heads were like, yeah, men are shit.
Yeah, men are really shit.
But no, it was great. Like I struggled with it though. Like I'm saying it's great. Everyone here knows, well, most people here know that I really struggled to actually get through this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. But she does tell it in an engaging way, but it kind of repeats a bit, because obviously you're revisiting the different iterations of how it's been done. So like it does feel a bit repetitive at times. And also because I read Stoneblind first, and Medusa's also in here, it just kind of, with this being fiction, it's like more flowery and there's a whole narrative to it. It was like very jarring almost to then revisit it in a more analytical light almost. So I did struggle. I thought it was going to be lower, and then I decided I'm going to put it through Core Pile, and that's where it came out at 4.5 stars. I was like, I'm so glad that happened. How much I struggled getting through it, just because, again, I think it's because I read this literally the week before. I was worried that I was going to be like, no, this is only like 3 or something, but no, it did do well, which I'm very pleased about, and I would recommend it. And then I might as well talk about this, means though I brought it up. So I also read Stoneblind, which is a Medusa retelling, and it did a really, really good job of like humanizing Medusa. So you see all the events leading up to it, which I was already aware of, but like having it sort of actually as a narrative now, because I knew of events, but like I'd never really given it much thought, sort of thing. So having it like explicitly given to me as a story, it kind of brings it home again of like how much she is like the victim, not a monster in this story. So I really enjoy that, and I also love how much of just a wet wipe Theseus is in this. No, in this one, like he's useless. He's so terrible.
Can we add that to the textbooks?
Yeah. Wet wipe.
Yeah. Like honestly, it was great. I very much enjoyed that. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, because I'm not good at remembering books once I finish them. So I tried to read them last second. I finished the other one 2 hours ago. So I have more to say. This one, I'm like, what else happened?
What happened? Have you read any other like Medusa retellings or anything like that?
I
Because I know
have.
that they're really prevalent at the moment.
Yeah, so I've read one other, and it was like a novella a couple of years ago by Michelle Amit-Rani, I think. And it was called Stoneblind. And that also did a very good job of like humanizing her, and it's her death is what it centers on, but in a completely different way. So like she's been in a cave, she's like a healer for the local village, and they'll come to her for like help with stuff. Like it's a completely different light on her, and I really enjoyed that. And it makes the death even more sad, sort of things from what it is already.
It's interesting.
But I do recommend that as well.
It's interesting that you touched on that idea of women already having had voices in these myths and the way that they're stripped away, because I went to Samantha Shannon's A Day of Fallen Night tour, and basically all of her second question that she had, which took up the rest of the chat, was about the way that in her book, the most recent one, she has kind of looked at the way that myths are made, and that was exactly where she got her inspiration from it, because when she was investigating all of these myths that she's sort of taken apart and retold for her fantasy series, she noticed that she noticed that thank you, that was really handy. She noticed that there were periods in history where some people were more popular than others, and then little parts of the narrative would fall away, and then with different popular ideas some things would get added, and what we have now is nothing like the source material, but it's really difficult to find the source material because of what? The patriarchy. And so like excavating women's voices is so much more difficult. So when you said that, I was like, oh, like all of the little things connected, and I was like, that was what she was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Angela Saini goes in hard on that and like talks about like different like source materials for finding women's voices and things like this. And also because I read Inferior and then the Patriarchs like straight after each other, they're written like 7 years apart from each other. So even the perspective of Angela Saini has clearly like changed because they found like new evidence and stuff. But it's really interesting that it's like, and they were there. Women were there the whole time, but we just chose to ignore them. And here's the reasons why. And I found that really like, so I think it is one of those things where, and because like what I really liked about picking Fuck the Patriarchy in general is Fuck the Patriarchy doesn't just mean like misogyny, right? It's not just anti-women. It's also anti-LGBT and anti-people of color and anything where if you're not in this tiny little box, we're not interested, and we're going to focus and center on this because we're going to
it's essentially anti-men as well.
Yeah,
patriarchy. Like there's so much where so often it's when a man is trying to have an argument with you, usually a cis straight white man is trying to have an argument with you about something that you've said about misogyny, and they're like, oh, but for men it's this, for example, like men's suicide rates are higher than women's. And it's like, well, one, you don't want me to give you the reason that is, you really don't, because it's just going to make you angry. But two, separate from that, ignoring the fact that women commit less suicide because they have more people dependent on them and so they feel like they can't. Separate from that, is that not a problem we should be addressing? But we can't, because in the patriarchy, mental health is considered something that you shouldn't talk about.
Yes, that's something that Laura Bates goes in really hard on in this book. Actually, to be honest, there's a paragraph right at the start of this where, right in the introduction, where I actually had to stop reading and just put it down and be like, that's another day, because she talks about the idea of obviously men's activism and men's activist groups in the news now is, you know, very just anti-feminism. But in the 60s, there was a men's activist group which is still running today, which was set up, which was working in conjunction with the feminist movement to be like, no, look, the ideas that we are being handed about ourselves are inherently toxic, and then we are oppressing ourselves as well as everybody else. And it really, she goes on like in the next paragraph to be like, if we cannot give fathers the tools to protect their sons, to fight for their sons, to have different choices from them. And I was like, ow. But it's so accurate. It's quite often having an argument about any kind of intersectional anything with men comes back to the fundamental reality that they don't like it because they feel like they don't have the choice to participate in it, not just because they don't like it, but they don't often realize they have to choose that for themselves, that they have to have the active agency to be the change. I'll stop ranting now.
No, I'm here for any rant. Like, again, this is why I picked the topic, because like if you don't, I will. Like, I will get
on top of the fact that they, like, on top of them having to actively engage with it, it's also the fact that it's the same thing that we hear people of color, predominantly obviously Black people in the United States, talking about with like anti-racist movements, of the fact that anytime that equality is brought, the group that felt and who was in power feels as though they are losing that power when they're not. The others are just being brought to the same standard. And the same thing is happening and has been happening with every movement like this, LGBTQ plus, feminism, racism, everything. People who have the power are suddenly losing that power, and anyone who isn't, even lots of people who are in marginalized groups, but anyone specifically who's not in a marginalized group, so great, this white men, feel like they're losing. So like they feel like they're being dragged back. Like to them, they're suddenly losing opportunities. Like I've had men that I respect say like, oh yeah, but like there's all those systems in place that give like training for how to progress in the company that I'm working in, and it's only for women, for people of color, LGBTQ plus people. I don't get this. And I'm like, yeah, because you get it in life and we don't. And it's hard to kind of, and they're like, yeah, but they're getting specific skills that I'm not getting. And I'm like, I know, but you got it in life. You don't.
Yeah.
I'm trying to explain that they feel like they're being deprived of something. It's like, no, you naturally have had this.
Yeah.
Your teachers in school will have paid more attention to you. Your lecturers in college and in university would have paid more attention to you, and you would have been more likely to actually give you the resources that you needed. I had a lecturer in my master's who didn't give me a contact because, well, I don't want to waste it on you, was his exact words. In front of everyone else in my tutor group, he said that. And the others all just kind of looked at each other like, did he actually just say that? Like, would that have happened if I had been a white man? I highly doubt it.
No. And that's the other thing that she brings up really early on in this book, actually, is when she is like, the idea of an incel, if you strip down all of the other propaganda, if you strip down all of the language, it is generally a straight, cis white man who feels like he has not been given the promised experience that he was meant to have in the system that was set up for him. And because he is somehow perceived as, in his mind and everybody else's, who is a straight cis white man, as lower, he then has to have somewhere to blame for that. But it's not the other cis straight white men, it's everybody else that is marginalized that has made his life more difficult.
And the thing is, for me, and this is probably like a personal thing, but I'd be interested to know what you guys think about it. It creates a cognitive dissonance for me, because when I see people getting butthurt about things like that, there's no sympathy. I've got no empathy for them whatsoever. But in theory, it's not them as an individual that's the issue. It's like the institution as a whole. So I want to have empathy for them on that basis. And then sometimes an individual will say something like your lecturer, for example. And sometimes it's not even that sinister. I was having a conversation with my brother. Now, it's a running joke that my brother, being a white guy in Kent, doesn't really need to worry about walking at night. And we hosted a live show for Gothtober, and he came on this live show, and it finished like 10 o'clock at night. And then he's like, oh, I need to go. And I was like, oh yeah, he's going for his walk. Now, he was the only guy on the live show, and literally everyone else's reaction was like, could never be me, like I would die, like absolutely. And like even in that moment, he's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go, like this is just the normal part of his life. He said something to me earlier today about how sometimes he just forgets that he's a white guy. and he forgets, like someone will say something, but like, yeah, well, you can. And it takes him a minute to go, oh yeah, that's not a thing that everyone can have. And I was like, and that being able to forget that that's like something that you have to be conscious of is the privilege. And that's why, like,
it does also make it more difficult for them to, like, they have to actively every second of every day try to remember, and like, who can do that? Not me. Like, whereas anyone else who is in any marginalized group it's ridiculous that women are even a marginalized group. We are 50% of the fucking population. But anyone that is in a marginalized group, we have to do that for ourselves all the time. And so even though, for example, every single person in this live presents as white, regardless of your actual ethnicity, we present white. And so we have that privilege. But because we have, obviously this doesn't apply to everyone, but especially with us 6, because we have the issue of feminism and not being treated equally as women, we are more open and receptive to then having discussions about LGBTQ plus rights, about racism. And I find that a lot across the various different communities, is that the least likely to be open to discussion and to learning is this straight men.
Especially when they need it proved to them again, because that exact scenario that you were talking about came up with one of my friends, and on the surface, my friend is very traditionally attractive, very traditionally the correct size, etc., to be an attractive woman in British media, but she's also a police officer, and so her personal trainer. She was saying, I'm having trouble getting in my steps when I get home to make the steps up for your plan. And he just very blithely went, well, go out your shift and go for a walk. And she was like, I look like this and I am female, etc., etc. And you've told me to do an impossible thing. And he was like, he argued the bit with her, and she eventually said to him, I guarantee you go to every one of your female presenting clients and ask them the same question. And then he had to come back and make an apology to her and be like, no, you're right, we'll think about something else. And I'm like, it's the idea of being receptive to that conversation initially without having to have it proved out to you by your lived experience. It's listening to the people's voices who are in those groups when they tell you that there's a problem. And so many men in my experience and in my sort of like social circles and stuff will always do that thing of digging in first and then having to dig themselves back out. And they don't come to you on an even playing field of, I will listen to you. They come to you as, I hear your point, now prove it.
Yeah.
So a straight cis white man that I love dearly, the issue that he has specifically is that he is very, very science-minded. Now, so am I, scientist, but he is very science-minded to the point where he won't really accept anything unless there's been studies done on it that have enough representation in the studies. They need to, like, very, like, if any of you have done any science, like, he needs every single thing to have been ticked. Like, there can't be too few participants. It can't, like, he won't deal with it if there's not enough range. So if it's all white women in a study, he's like, no, it doesn't count. Which I appreciate, but it's like, okay, but the problem is that because of patriarchy, the studies don't get done.
Yeah.
No one has the money to fund the studies. This is the issue. Like, if you're only accepting data, then you're going to have to pay for the data, and I know he cannot afford to pay for the data. Like, it's another thing of, like, another barrier to overcome is that there are some people who, if you take away that factor of the patriarchy prohibiting the data being collected, then that is a fair stance to have. In a equal playing field, only accepting data when it's been, you know, peer reviewed and you've got evidence makes sense.
Yes.
In a straight cis white man's world.
I kind of want to jump in and talk about my picks, but like just off of the back of that, because I feel like I keep bringing them up anyway. So if I just kind of like clarify some things, it might make it a bit easier. So Superior is the...
Can I just jump in real quick? Are you leaving me laughing just to punish me?
No.
Okay.
Lizzie, just sleep while we do this.
Lizzie, have a nap and then I'll shout up when I'm done, and you can wake up again.
I keep on tuning in at really opportune moments, and I tuned in to Abby saying, if any of you have ever done science. Like, no, Abby, clearly I've never done science before in my life. But like, I tuned in at that moment, and like, I'm listening to you all, but my brain is so tired that I literally can't comprehend the conversation.
Well, I'll do my boring bit, and then you can go next, yeah?
Your boring bit.
Look at the touch. You're so fucking extra. Like,
to be fair, Hannah, I do think that the link that we were on has now been destroyed. Yeah, and at least ours kind of match. So like, let's just let Lizzie go.
Do you want to do yours, Lizzie? Go on.
Oh.
Come on, get it out the way.
No.
She's like, but I just untucked myself in.
No.
Bitch, sit up.
No, it's Hannah's turn. It's fine.
Do it from there.
Anyway, right, where was I? Right. Superior was the first book by Angela Saini I ever read, and it is about race science. And essentially, Angela Saini is a scientist that specializes in like sociology and kind of like social sciences, civilization, etc. And as a woman of color, we're studying where racism comes from in that scientific basis. So much like you said, Abby, we've got all this data, but it is driven by the need to prove that there is an us and them. And what I thought was really interesting is then reading Inferior, it is very, very similar in the idea that a lot of the analysis of the difference between men and women is purely based on scientists wanting to prove there is a difference between men and women. So a lot of the times there's a big bias in this science because they're trying to prove like men's brains are bigger and they've got more testosterone and they've got this, that, and the other. And this makes them stronger and it makes them smarter and it makes them this, that, and the other. And I tell you what, it made me hate scientists straight up. Like the way it's just like there was one scientist that she quoted as saying, just because it's sexist doesn't mean it's not true. And I was like, I feel like that's an oxymoron. Like that's not how that works.
Like they will use the data, but only when it combines with their views. Like again, I won't go too much now, but like medical things. If there's medical data that shows that a drug works differently in women and men, they won't look at what it does to women. They only look at what it does to men because that's easier.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really interesting, but it was quite hard going with regards to like how misogyny basically was born. And then the patriarchs, considering that like Inferior was the first book they ever published and Patriarchs came out like a week ago. I had totally forgotten that I had pre-ordered it, let alone pre-ordered it so that it would arrive during Fuck the Patriarchy. But this one was far more interesting just because it looks more at history rather than science and kind of the way certain arguments are built up. But what I thought in general was really, really interesting about this one was the fact that, like you said, Hannah, these voices that have been essentially washed away, there is an archaeology site based somewhere I think it's in Mexico, I can't really remember. I really like sped read through this one, but essentially there were all these like women idols. They were like these little statuettes and they started being referred to as the goddesses, and yet there is no evidence that these women were ever goddesses. They were just these little statuettes that seem to be in a lot of homes. There's no evidence that it wasn't just like if you had these, it was like a status symbol, like a television essentially, like the bigger yours was, like the better kind of thing. But the idea that because there were so many male archaeologists, they were like, well, the only reason you would ever kind of create a pedestal for these female figures must be because they were gods, or they must have been empresses, or they must have been important, as opposed to just the idea that being feminine was enough. And they looked at different matriarchies and why matriarchies worked and why they didn't, and how a lot of Indian cultures were matriarchies. And it was only really when white people rocked up with Christianity and just rolled us over everything that we then made it a patriarchy, and then went, but you've always been a patriarchy, look at all your male gods that you have. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. So it's a really interesting analysis of how often it gets completely whitewashed, and that kind of whiteness is the institutionalized patriarchy, because every kind of person is affected by the patriarchy: men, women, non-binary, black, white, whatever. And I found that really, really interesting. My one kind of critique of it is nothing to do with anything to do with the book, but more my comprehension level is these are dense. And I think it's really interesting, Abby, that you enjoyed it so much, because I enjoyed it, but there were times when I needed it broken down. And I needed patronizing a little bit. I needed like, we've made this point. Can we make it again for someone who's got like a lower reading level? And I also read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, which she's a journalist first, and then she's looking at race. So hers, she makes a lot more of like contemporary, even though it was like written years ago, they're far more contemporary references, and they talk about like different forms of misogyny and anti-patriarchy in modern TV and film, and how with a lot of Black media, the only roles Black actors could take on was essentially the slave, and anything that was kind of tied to that. And even in modern contemporaries with Black actors in it, they're usually the best friend, they're like the token or whatever. Yeah. So Angela Saini does touch on stuff like that, but it's far more in history and politics than it is in kind of contemporary references. So I want to recommend Bad Feminist as like an intro if you're like, I want to know more, but like this is like you said earlier, like it's advanced feminism as opposed to just I'm going to read a catch, you know, like the audiobook's on script, but it takes a minute to kind of, or certainly it took a minute for me to kind of process. But it is one of those things where once you've read it, every conversation you have, you're like, I need to tell you more about the patriarchy because I read this book and now I have all this knowledge.
So, actually, did you know that white women ruined everything?
It's like one of the things actually, white women did ruin a lot. Like it is one of those things where they're like, she talks about how the idea of working at home and your wife being left at home was a real class thing. And the idea that, especially during like the Georgian and Victoria era, it was really honed in that women should be stay-at-home wives, not because of like patriarchy as we imagine it, of like men forcing women at home, but because it was seen as an idealized way of living. And if you were a woman working, oh, poor you must be really poor. Like it was a sign of poverty if you weren't staying at home all day. And now it's become this thing of like, well, you should stay at home, you shouldn't need to work. And it's like an elitism and capitalism all kind of rolled into one, but painted with, well, you're a bad mother if you leave your kids at home, and you're a bad wife if you haven't got like dinner waiting at home. And actually it's like, well, yeah, if I was born 200 years ago, I would have to work. I could not afford to like eat without working. But how like that is kind of, again, it's kind of hushed up because it's not the pretty history that serves the government that we live today, you know, that sort of thing. So
it's interesting that you bring up that point though about staying at home, because I read a thriller last year called People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd, which is a cis guy and a cis woman writing team. I forget whether they're married or not, but either way. And the whole purpose of it is, this woman is a mummy blogger. She is on Instagram. She's very open about how horrific motherhood has been for her, how terrible her house looks, the poop explosions, all these kinds of things. But actually, this woman has a nanny and a cleaning team, etc. And she's actually staging all of her content. And the whole point of the book, and without ruining any of the twists in it, because it's a great page turner if that's what you want, but the whole point of the book is that this woman is somehow terrible because she has played the system. And the sort of third point of view, the mystery stalker in it, is like, no, she tells lies about everything, and she plays up to this idea of being hard done by. And I'm like, okay, but even the people writing the book did not catch the irony of the fact that the woman who has learned to play the system which was handed to her is not necessarily the villain.
Yeah.
I hate people.
Yeah, people are the worst. People are the worst. Yeah. So
you're okay, but you know.
Yeah. No, that's cool. But yeah, so I found it really interesting. And I would definitely be more interested to read, like I love Angela Saini's writing style. And the thing that will always kind of get me to recommend their books is just how thorough they are. Like, they are treated like a proper dissertation. There's references for everything, there's footnotes for everything, and it's like she's done the work, you know. So I find it very, very easy to recommend all of those books. So Lizzie, now that I'm done, would you like to tell us about your book?
I feel like we're coaxing a like semi-feral animal out of its cage. Like,
yeah, that's exactly what's happening here.
To come for a hug today?
I'm so upset. I was wide awake at 7 o'clock this morning. I like came like stomping downstairs, woke up the people who were sleeping on the sofa, fucking went in, did the kitchen. I was having a now at like whatever time it is now, my brain's like, okay, you've done it.
It doesn't help that we also lost an hour.
We did lose an hour.
Yeah, we really did.
Yeah. Like when we were starting at 7, I was like, my brain thinks it's 5:30. And it's half an hour until my 7 live stream. What's going on?
Well, I read Hag, Forgotten Folktales Retold. And this is a collection of 10 short stories from mythologies across the UK. And it's something from Scotland, Wales, and England and Northern Ireland. And it's really interesting because I had not read, other than the one that was set in Cornwall, because of course I did, because I'm a talking, whatever the word is, brain's completely gone.
Cliche?
Yeah, cliche. Being from Cornwall, so of course I only know the Cornish story. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't enjoy it. I did not enjoy this book. I went in thinking this is gonna be like feminist, it's gonna be talking about all these women who have been wronged in these myths. No, it doesn't really fucking do that. It just puts the myths into modern times, and I've never been more disappointed in a book ever. There's only one story. Well, okay, no, there are 3 stories, 3 out of the 10 that I enjoyed. One of them,
that is not a pass rate.
No, one of them was called The Panther, and it spoke about a cursed princess who was basically cursed to turn into a panther to get away from her husband, who tricked her into marrying him, and then the panther got caught by an Englishman and brought back to England because of course. And she basically helps heal this woman's daughter, and then their husband is like, she's a witch, and it was all like cool, and it was just an interesting thing. Another one was about a banshee, which was very interesting, and then the third one I liked was the Selkie story. That was really interesting. But that wasn't Fuck the Patriarchy because her son drowns her. How does women lose? This is supposed to be feminist retellings, and I'm like, did these authors not read the assignment? Because they missed so many times.
If you want feminist Selkies, you should read the 4 Treasures series.
Thanks. I'll put it on my list. Hannah, remember that.
Okay.
I felt honestly that exact same thing though. I read Wake Siren last year by Nina McLaughlin, and it's this stunning. It's like the idea of reclaiming Ovid's metamorphosis, and the blurb so much like, oh, we're gonna like stick it to the man, and just all of these women are suddenly gonna get voices. And I'm like, no, what you did was very, very pretty experimental fiction, doing the same thing that the men have already done. It's not. I saw in the brief, man.
I think the story that annoyed me the most was they retold a story called The Brothers, and they just changed it to The Sisters.
Amazing.
And then they were both. So then the story is about the 2 brothers who cheat on each other's wives, basically. So you know what they did to make this feminist? They made it just that the women did the same thing.
Yes, because that is so likely.
Like, I just, you know, I really went into this thinking this is going to be perfect for Fuck the Patriarchy, and then it just wasn't.
My favourite thing that Lizzie said earlier today was I've never read a feminist book and struggled to find the feminism before. Like, imagine struggling to find the feminism in feminist retelling.
I will say,
I've just went and removed it off of my TBR. I added it thinking like Lizzie just didn't like the stories, and I literally just moved my mouse, removed from shelf.
I love that. The assumption on the surface there was Lizzie is judgy, and now it's
No. And they're right.
It says on here, okay, on this little blurby thing, it says engaging modern fables with a feminist tang. Where? Sorry.
Wait, that's a feminism.
Making them queer doesn't make it feminist, and making women cheat on other women also is not a feminist thing. I don't know. Like, I was just so mad, and this cover is so pretty. But
it's
like,
very upsetting. The amount of money spent on mediocre books and book production recently, and like the Greek myth retelling genre, is very upsetting.
Speaking of Greek retellings, I don't know if anyone's seen that there's like the gender bent retellings thing.
Yes.
That was originally turned down by Canongate because it's just copied and pasted from the Gutenberg version and then changed he to she.
No.
Like, that's literally all they've done.
Yeah.
Love.
It's still been printed. It's still like the cover looks great, but it is just copied and pasted and then swapped around.
Who picked it up? Which publishing house?
I can't remember, but I know that
Canongate for saying that.
Canon, like, we can do better. we can aim higher, guys.
No.
Please let me talk about my other book before.
Please do, yeah. Please talk about the better one.
I beg you.
I beg you.
I realized I needed to not just shit on my book, and I wanted a book that actually is fuck the patriarchy. And the one that I've read most recently, but it was last year, is Iron Widow by Sarah J. Zhao. This is about as fuck the patriarchy as you can get. It is a retelling of a time period in China, and I can't remember because it was that my brain is not working. But it's a sci-fi robots against aliens type deal, and the way the robots, the big massive robots that go out to fight the aliens, are powered are by a male pilot, and then their concubine. So the women are literally used as batteries for the men. And Zetian, right at the beginning, goes, right, this fucker killed my sister. I'm going to go kill him now. And she goes and signs up to the army, fully intending to go and kill the motherfucker that killed her sister. And Zetian is a badass bitch, and I love her with all my heart. She is a very powerful female character. She doesn't take shit from anybody, and everyone is shit scared of her. But then, there is a few moments. There's polyamory in this, which we love to see it. We love to see it. And she gets paired with like all these dangerous pilots because they think that they're gonna kill her. I mean, slight spoiler alert: they don't kill her. That's why
she lives.
And that is
a much shorter book.
Much shorter book.
But this is why
the sequel would be interesting.
Talking about sequels, I'm very excited to read the sequel. But this is so good. It is about getting one over men and not allowing like your own body to be taken over by someone else. And like, she fucking rules. So if you haven't read this, please do. It's incredible. And I just want to say, I watched a TikTok from Zero J Zhao literally the other day where she was talking about why the sequel hasn't come out yet, and that's because publishers fucking suck and they only paid her £4,000. I'm sorry, this was a fucking bestseller, and you're telling me the publishers got millions of dollars? $4,000.
Wow.
because they told her that the book was too niche to risk much more than that, and then they insisted on a sequel when it was doing so well. And what, like, the TikTok is so good because it really goes into like step by step the process of like working out how they were going to live off £4,000 for a year, and then watching it hit bestseller list week after week after week, but their bank account staying the exact same because you only get 3 lots of royalties per year. So knowing that you weren't going to get it for another like 6 months or 8 months, depending on when those royalties came in, is the publishing industry is so messed up. It's so messed up. But I am excited for a sequel. I've not read the first one yet, but Lizzie keeps talking about it, so I'm going to have to eventually.
I really cannot wait for the sequel, but also mad respect to the author because I totally get it. You're getting paid more for another series. Of course, you're going to write that first. But I am sad and I need to know what happens with these characters because the end of this is a proper fuck you to like literally everyone. And maybe that's why I like Zetian, because she hates people about the same amount as I do.
Yeah.
Love that.
So yeah, that's my picks.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you for staying awake long
managed
enough.
to articulately stay awake.
You know, I just needed to start talking because my brain has woken up now. So,
are you going to stick it out, or are you going to head to bed?
No, I'm here. I'm not gonna be weak. Don't worry. I'm
not going to be weak. The patriarchy will not get me today.
No, the patriarchy will not win.
Well, then that leaves us with Abby. Where's your little thing? I've got it here somewhere. There you go.
There we go.
I knew it was there somewhere.
Already, Abby doesn't get an overlay.
I made a real point to make them, but for some reason, I could change the name on all of ours except Lizzie's and Abby's. You're 6 and 7 for some reason.
Oh,
right. Wouldn't change it, so I got it wrong.
I mean, it ended up being the order we were in. So there, I have 2 books. One is the one I set out to read for this, and the other one is one that I ended up reading and actually fits better. So I set out to read Shield Maiden by Sharon Emmeridges, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong. This is a historical fantasy. It is linked with Beowulf, and it is like the niece of Beowulf and her kind of story. That's how it's pitched. In reality, it's basically like a female retelling of Beowulf, but Beowulf has already happened. Okay. And so King Beowulf is present in this story, and it kind of happens again.
Okay.
So I know that Hannah also read this, and we ended up having pretty similar thoughts on it. In terms of the feminism in it, that's absolutely fine. In terms of like the patriarchy, like Hannah may disagree, but I feel like, you know, everything that happened in here was like pretty like, again, they try and keep like, you know, with the times. It was a patriarchal society at the time, and that's kind of part of the thing, is like when the woman has more say than one of the men, it's like, what the hell, and he gets like really angry about it. It's like, it's done realistically, it's done well. The book itself, however, so right, the characters.
Yeah, it was the tension.
So like the characters themselves, I really liked, like the ones that you're meant to like. Not Wiglaf, don't come for me. There's an evil character in this, and so the characters that you're supposed to like, I really do, and I really wanted to learn more about them, but it was a struggle to pick this book up and to keep reading because the writing style, it was so slow, and somehow she was managing to develop this connection with me and with the character, but not with me and the book. Like somehow I deeply cared for the characters and I wanted to know what was going to happen. It took me far too long, considering I'd read a translation of Beowulf, to realize that it was just Beowulf. But I was like really interested in the characters, and she couldn't get me interested in a story that I've read before. It was really, really weird. Like I was telling my other half that like I'm really invested in like these people. Like I was reading this quite slowly because I didn't want to pick it up. So obviously the characters were sitting in my head for longer. And so like I had like a pretty decent connection with the characters. Like I really like how they're written. But also their character development could be written better. So it's not just like the writing of the characters versus the writing of the plot. Like the character development could have been written so much better. And the plot was written really badly, considering it is just a remake as well of some. I don't understand, basically. And I think Hannah is nodding at certain bits, so I think she agrees.
Yeah, I think my review was, I liked the ending, but I also just didn't care.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then just before Lizzie, I will also say, one second. I will say, because I can't say much, because this would be a spoiler. This is right at the end of it, but also it's Beowulf. There's a dragon, okay? The dragon is predicted the entire way through. You get the dragon like here.
We do love dragons. Like that's
not enough dragon. Not enough dragon. You know how I said not enough dinosaurs in Lost in Time? There was plenty of dinosaurs.
It's never enough dinosaurs or dragons or like any creatures.
Right, but there was plenty of dinosaurs compared to the dragon in here. Now, Lizzie has a question before she falls asleep.
I was just going to ask, do you think that the quality of the plot is just because it's an overdone story? Or is that
no?
I don't know.
No.
I love that your face immediately went, was that controversial?
No, I mean, it's not controversial. There's been like multiple like translations of the same book, multiple like retellings of the book. It's not a controversial point, but no, that's not the issue with this book. Like, I could give this to some other authors that I've loved books from, and they can, like, there is potential here, even though they are technically just reworking the plot of Beowulf and then making it like I said, they're just kind of shifting it slightly. Even though it's so similar, like there's so much they can work with here, and they just somehow don't manage to. I feel like the editor should have kind of worked with them to drag more out of the story, because
that's basically my question though, because like if you're going, my question is, what's the point of just rewriting Beowulf again? Because like
that's to make it feminist, I think, is the entire point of it.
I like retellings that are enough different that you can still see the source material, but like I don't just want to read Beowulf again. Like I don't really care if you change some characters into women. Like I'm sorry, like for me there needs to be more substance in a book. So I'm like asking really if there's any point in reading this book, Abby.
So because the book is not very well written, no, but if someone came and wrote this book, took the exact same thing, or even just the same author herself, and like edited it again, I would 100% pick it up to see like if it had improved. The actual intentions behind the plot, yes. I don't recommend this. I don't recommend. It's not bad. I gave it like 3.5. It's not bad, but I don't recommend picking this up and spending your time on it, unfortunately. But
as someone, sorry, I was going to say, just as someone who isn't overly familiar with Beowulf, I can confirm no.
Interesting.
Like there's enough different with the plot. It's not just that she's changed some genders and that she's also, you know, made it like happen again. Like because she's changed the gender, she has worked with that alteration of the gender. She's added in plot points that wouldn't have been included in the original. So content warnings, for example, of like attempted sexual assault. There is misogyny in here that is not just, oh, it's a throwaway line because this character's female now. Like it's ingrained into the story. Like there is so much potential in this, genuinely. Like if this had been written better, it would have been, in my opinion, a great feminist retelling of Beowulf. Instead, the writing fell flat. Like the concept is fantastic if you are willing to power through 400 pages of a book that you're not going to enjoy, which I highly doubt any of you will. Then like you can make a fantastic story in your head from what she has provided with very little effort. Again, Hannah's not.
If I want to do that, I'll watch a film. Like I feel like with a film, it's such easy. Like it's an hour of my time, and then I can just daydream. You know, like if I'm going to read, I want it to be a good book.
I was genuinely concerned about what Lizzie was brandishing at us there.
Yeah, she's got a paintbrush.
Yeah,
like, really has brought the no stick.
So fantastic plot, awful execution of said plot. Like someone helped her write down the bullet points, and they then didn't help her expand on the bullet points.
Yeah.
Before you move on to your second book, can I just ask, and I am asking this because I think it will be controversial, I think it'll be funny. Where do we stand on how well the writer knows the source material when they write a retelling?
I don't care about that.
You don't care?
Already, I don't care much about authors. I would read pretty much anything as long as the story is good. I wouldn't pay much attention to the author. And specifically, you're asking that. So like, mythological retelling. I know that there's an author, I don't remember the name at all, an author who hasn't studied at all mythology and wrote a book about that. I am 100% going to read that because if it's better than this one, but
I will say, I agree with you, Celine, but I also judge an author who will openly admit that they've done a retelling, and then they go, "I haven't read the source material though." Because why would you admit that? Because if it is great, and if it's a great retelling, you've just exposed yourself to way too much hate. Like that's just
and for no reason, because it really like I'm on your boat, Celine. Like I don't think I care so long as I enjoy the book, and I do
would
think
want to know.
Huh?
Yeah,
I need to know.
with Abby. I would need to know because I have a very interesting French group, and that there are very many historians and classicists in it. And I love all of these people, Jean, very deeply, but they have very, very specific ideas about what it means to adapt to source material. And I totally get that. But I think that there is there's the idea of approaching it as a classicist, as a historian, where you are taking the source material and you want people desperately to see the original story in the source material, but you want to slightly adapt it. Mm-hmm. And that for me is boring, because if I want that, I'm gonna read the source material, mm-hmm. and I'm gonna just go, the source material is not modern, therefore these things don't exist in it. Mm-hmm. I want a retelling. I want something that I want characters that I actually not just root for, but I need to give a shit about them, mm-hmm. enough that when I put the book down, I think about them in the same way that I think about other characters in any other.
That's right there. Yeah. That is why I need to know, because if I know going in that it is technically based on this thing from the, so say it was based on Beowulf, but it's not fully based on, they've not read it, cool, I can read that as a story, wonderful, it is a story. If it is based on, again, Beowulf, and I know that they are adapting it from Beowulf, I know they've read Beowulf, I know that it actually has the information, I will basically, not intentionally, I do this anyway, not intentionally use that and be like, okay, this is the facts now. I love learning through fiction. Like I adore, like I love a good nonfiction, but I adore learning through fiction. So if you can give me something that has inaccuracies in, because of course it will do, but gives a solid general overview.
Yeah.
I mean, even, do I have it here? No, it's somewhere over there. But even the King Chronicles by Rick Riordan. Like that's a like mythological retelling of ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, which is clearly taking massive liberties, but he's also very clearly researched it so in depth that I now have a much deeper knowledge of ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses than I did going in, and so like I need to know that they've done the research.
However, caveat to all of that, but I have a gremlin brain and I've woken up now, so I'm sorry. I agree to an extent. However, there are some stories that I do think are well enough known now that you don't necessarily have to have read the source material. Let's be honest, I'm not going to wish anyone to read the Odyssey unless they really fucking want to. But I just don't want you to admit that. Okay, I just don't want to know that you haven't bothered if you're writing a retelling, because I'm more inclined to read the retelling, which isn't thousands of pages of classic, white man literature. I would much rather read the retelling that's 300 pages and it's a TLDR. But that's just me.
In that circumstance, though, I'm like, if you haven't read the source material and you don't really care enough about the source material to read it, make up a new book.
Yeah.
Like you can say like for fans of
or inspired by, but don't call it a retelling.
Like you can say for fans of Beowulf, and then we'll be like, oh cool, it's got Beowulf vibes, which is what they're actually intending, and instead they're trying to jump on the hype train.
It's Priory of the Orange Tree all over again. Yes, it's George and the Dragon, but also no, it's really freaking not. It's it's lots of women doing really cool things, and do the other thing. I'm bored of that thing. Do the other thing.
And I think sometimes you can tell if someone has like read the source material and actually enjoyed it versus has read it, studied it, and now they're doing their own thing with it. Because like spoiler alert for like a project I've been doing for the last 4 months. I'm reading as many Pride and Prejudice retellings as I can for Jane Austen July, and I'm doing like a big vlog for it. So I started with Pride and Prejudice because it's one of my favorites, and then I did Death Comes to Pemberley, and I'm like I said, I've got like 100 pages left.
Sorry, that came out loud.
And I loved it. But the thing is, like with Death Comes to Pemberley, to me, that is a person who's read the book, understands it, and then has just kind of gone, but for my narrative I need to do this. But I don't get the impression that they ever actually enjoyed Pride and Prejudice, let alone any other Jane Austen novel, because there is not a single female character with any autonomy in that entire murder mystery. Whereas the other Bennet sister, there's elements of Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Persuasion. Like there's all these different like little Austen isms. There's even like references to like Jane Eyre when it comes to like the governess thing and where Mary is going to be situated because she's the last sister and she's not married. And I really get the impression that the writer wrote this because they were like, I love Jane Austen and there's only so many books and I need more of them, because it's such a great amalgamation of all of the things that are loved by Jane Austen, like from the wit and the personal growth and like all this like really like gentle writing. Like it's such a good adaptation of all of those things, and I'm really glad. Like it's huge. I was really nervous about going into it.
It's still on my shelf because it's a terrifying amount of pages.
It's a bit, and it's in like parts as well, so it's like it's chunky. But I absolutely think it is worth the read, because I feel like, again, the characters feel honest enough to the original that I can tell the author really enjoyed the original, but adapted enough to suit this narrative. This Mary main character is reminiscent of the one we see in Pride and Prejudice, but because we're behind her eyes, she's a lot more empathetic. We can see why she does things, we can see why she reacts to things, and we can see her grow. Like the actual Pride and Prejudice bit is only the first 150 pages, and then it's everything after that.
Can I recommend to you on this subject something that I think every single one of you will like, genuinely? And it is a retelling of a book which uses the book but does not actually retell the book. Allow me to explain. It's called Jane Steele by Lindsay Fay, and it is a Jane Eyre retelling. But in this world, in Jane Steele's world, the book Jane Eyre exists. And so the character decides that she loves the person Jane Eyre so much. She thinks that she's so forward thinking and that she's, very like feminist and strong. And she decides to emulate her life as much as she can like Jane Eyre, except that Jane Steele doesn't quite have the same privileges that even Jane Eyre does. And so she turns into a serial killer and kills most of the men who wrong her in the way that Jane Eyre was wronged. And not only that, but the male love interest who takes the place of Rochester for this Jane Steele is a man who went to fight in the Indian Wars of the time, and his entire household are immigrants. And every single one of them teaches her a lesson about being a person that no white person in her life has ever taught her. And it's perfect. Lindsay Fay. Jane Steele with an E, if that helps. But it's Jane Steele. It's also very pretty.
I've already found it on Gardeners. I will be ordering a copy.
Why can I not find it?
It's real good. Like it's real good, and I actually have discovered that I still have a bookmark in it from the 100th time that I have reread it. It's real good.
It is on my TBR.
Stabbiness, lots of, but exactly like me, my love for this book aside, that's exactly my point. This is an entirely new book, but it has enough things in it that are recognizable, but it changes it to a modern attitude, even though this is still set in like the Victorian era. It's a new concept, and I'm like, just write a new book. Mm-hmm. You can still make allusions to the things that you love, but just write a new book. Mm-hmm. And preferably kill lots of men in it.
And preferably, there should be murder.
Yes.
Always.
Sorry, I knew what you were getting when you invited me here. There should be.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yes.
And murder. No, I do like that. I do like that. I read like a Jane Eyre like modern retelling that was trying to turn it into like a thriller. It was a real like you'd read it on holiday, gentle thriller. But the whole time I was like, is he gonna have actually killed his wife in this one? Because like that's wild. And like it was very exciting. I enjoyed it. So I recommend
I love the whole subtitle of "It is a read it on holiday gentle thriller, as I will leave it in the pool when I leave."
In the pool.
Just let it float away.
Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. So this is the book that I, for some reason, just decided to start this month, and I'm very glad I did, because now I have, I think this is 4.5, 5 stars. 4.5. I did have issues with it. But this basically is great for me with that issue with that white cis man where he needs all the data, and I'm like, hello, here you are. Here's all of this. It's broken down into chapters that basically just summarize everything that all of us already know, just from the fact that we are alive and you have to deal with it. But it gives you the data behind it, and then the lack of data behind it. And then what gets you really angry is seeing that with the data that we do have, what little governments, organizations, jobs, employers, people are doing with this information. I was stopping every 30 seconds, I'm being generous, to tell Chris, my other half, stuff from this book. It got to the point where he couldn't listen to anything to do with feminism for a week. Because he was fed up. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to my life. There was just like there's things that I'd like mentioned to him, and he'd been like, oh, like I've never heard of that before. And I'm like, see, it's in this book. Like 2 months later, I'm like, see that thing I mentioned? Look, it's right here. And it makes you feel very righteous at the start. You're like, see, fucking told you. And then as you get closer to the end, it makes you angry and depressed. Because it is giving you all this data about how many women across the world are suffering and dying for no good fucking reason. Like some of the half the facts that I've mentioned about feminism in this came from this book. Like it will give you a lot more detail, a lot more like we all know that like there's medical bias. This will give you exact examples with the data. Not so exact that you won't remember them, but just specific enough that you can drop them in conversation and be like, well, what about this? Like, the only issue I really had with this, you didn't have to specify which Hannah, to be fair. Or any of us, just all of us here murder.
Murder.
So, one, I guess, issue, not actually the book's fault, but is its age. So this is all pre-pandemic. Which felt quite interesting when reading the medical bits, and it's mentioning like, oh, we have a lot of data on previous pandemics, but only in men. What will happen? Like literally, there's a sentence that I'm paraphrasing here that's like, what will happen to women? Will we collect data on women the next time there's a large-scale pandemic? No, we did not. And women suffered because of literally everything. It was a bit surreal reading those sections. So one, that, and then two, the fact that it's all pre-pandemic and obviously a lot's changed. So like she'll like, I did some double takes when I was like, well, oh yeah, it's older. Like talking about like working from home and how that's not offered and how that's really helpful for women specifically because they tend to be running the home. And so it is out of date now because we had a global catastrophe. Not the book's fault. Also, it doesn't touch on anyone outside of the gender binary. It just talks about men and women. That makes more sense when it's talking about the medical chapters because it's discussing, we kind of mentioned it, we touched on it before, the different responses of women to medicine than men. That is, unless you are intersex, which is a smaller number of the population, there is actually some medical difference in some drugs for how women and men react. And this is saying how like she was getting really pissed off at the fact that we didn't research it more. Like Viagra apparently could be incredibly helpful for women's heart attacks.
Yes.
But they went, wait, it gets your dick hard? Don't care, that's the moneymaker.
That's the science done.
Like, And I think also it could help with like bad periods as well. And like again, they just didn't do anything. I'm like, do you understand how many women would buy that? Are you dumb? Yes, because they're men and they don't think about it. And so for those chapters where it's specifically talking about the biological difference, where even if you have transitioned one way or the other, medically, you are going to be, depending on your estrogen levels and stuff, you know, medically, just from the basis, that's the interesting part. And then you need to specialize for each individual. But when it's social like stuff, it doesn't mention people who transitioned in the slightest. And again, this could be because of the age of this book. This came out in like 2018, 2019, and across like from the pandemic, when people kind of had to sit in themselves for a lot longer, a lot more people were questioning their gender and questioning kind of their place in the gender spectrum. Go on.
I was fully expecting you to say it came out in like 2008. I'm sorry, but does 2018 feel a little bit like not in the past enough for them?
That's why I was doing this. You can't see because I'm as pale as Edward Cullen and my background is white. I did this when I said that.
To be fair, I wasn't looking at the screen because I feel like my eyes start to go real funny. So I
was doing little inverted commas around everything because it's not old. I know that 2019 is 2019, not 2018. I know that that's not far ago, but we've had a global pandemic since then, and
scientifically it kind of is though. When you were saying about like the medicine and stuff, I remember reading like articles that were like from really like niche magazines and stuff talking about how the like different jabs were then affecting like reproductive and like the medications that women were on, and nothing had been tested to see if it would have any impact on that contraception. That's what I'm looking for. It had like affected women's like contraception, and no one was like taking any heed of it because it wasn't affecting men.
Yeah, so, the COVID vaccines actually messed up my menstruation cycle, and it had me freaked out because like it really fucked with it. Nothing in like the side effects, but you go online and loads of people are reporting it. But go on the NHS website, weren't there? I think it was by the last one there was something mentioned, but
because there had been. This is where we're lucky with where we are today, in that there had been so much self-report, because there is nowhere for women to officially self-report a lot of these things. A lot of anything, like. If you are groped in a club, who would you go tell? There's no way to collect that sort of data. Whereas now that we've got Twitter, where you just put your thoughts out there, we have a way to collect the data. Also, it was absolutely hilarious in my master's. I had to reference a tweet. You can now reference tweets. There is a specific way to do it depending on what referencing system you are using. Fantastic. Also, go find all of the US national parks Twitter accounts. I promise, even scientists will love them. But so this talks about this again. This is pre-pandemic. This is pre-COVID, and so they never had that where women were able to self-report the specific issues that they were having, and so it was talking about how these were never encountered. So other pandemics include the SARS. Oh, which was it Ebola? Is that SARS? Regardless, something like that, where it's pandemic, not global, but multinational. And women were getting it and dying a lot more than men because they had to leave home because, like, when they're sending out emergency resources to these, I think it was specifically West African countries. And in the more rural villages, the task of collecting water, collecting firewood, falls to the women. So they'd send food out, be like, don't go anywhere. We need you to stay in your house. We've sent you food. But not send any fuel to cook it with, nor any water for anything else that you need water for. And it's the women who go get that. The women had to go. There's only going to be a certain number of places for people to collect adequate water. More women died. And so it's old in the fact that we've had such a massive global event occur where everything was so different to how it was before. We have so much data now that has been self-provided, self-reported by women. So that's a massive difference. And then again, everyone being isolated for 2 years means that a lot more people are questioning their gender identity. It's a lot more prevalent in science now than it was before. A lot of the references in here, like, I'm like, oh yeah, for the time it's published, it's not that old, but it's from like 2017, 2018. You can't reference that now. That's old. Like, that's ancient in science. Like, unless you are in something incredibly niche, or you're going back to like a base paper from like Einstein, you don't reference more than like 2-3 years back. Pandemic excluded, because you see that screwed with everything. And so yeah, it's old, and I won't have to do an updated one.
Yeah, at least to be able to do an updated version where she can then add, you know, at the end of a chapter to say, and now further data. It's interesting because that's my friend Kirsty calls these my niche sad topics that I'm interested in. So along with things like men who hate women, because myself and Harry both like to have chronic illnesses, and we do, you know, we live with it on a daily basis. I got really interested a couple of years ago before I was like, okay, I can no longer read sad stories about women being left out of the medical field. I got really interested in a kind of niche subgenre, which has like appeared in the last couple of years, talking about how women are specifically, you know, suffering from medical bias. And I have at least, you know, like 4 or 5 books on my shelf behind me that have existed from that, many things that I read and got very depressed about. But it's interesting because so there are 2 books in particular, one at the start of this and one at the end of this reading we did. And even in this just like 2-year span, the difference in the medical data is astounding. And they're talking about very much the same conditions and things. Absolutely astounding. But the bias has changed not at all. Like nothing has changed there. But the data in between, it's like, if we can gather so much data in such a short space of time, in what way can we not also change the system in this short space of time?
Although I do also feel like I need to point out, just for the people, science, medical science is all around men, all of it. Yeah. They claim that because of our menstrual cycle, because of the fact that our hormonal cycle is over a month roughly versus a man's 24 hours, because of all of these different factors, they cannot use women. They can't test on women. Pregnant women, I kind of get, because like, whilst we do kind of need the testing, you don't want to fuck up the fetus. So, like, I get that. Okay, that's fine.
They had to learn that the hard way, though, didn't they?
Knew before, I can't remember the name of it, but
thalidomide. Yeah.
They knew before that was used and agreed to use on the NHS. They knew it caused mutations. They knew before. They knew it in the mid to late 50s. It wasn't used in the UK till the 60s, the early 60s.
I've got an aunt and uncle who they used it. And like, yeah,
my gran was offered it for her migraines with my dad, and she said no. Purely because she says no to any kind of medication ever. And all of her friends took it, and all of her friends had children with mutations of some kind.
But so that's like, I get it with pregnant individuals. That makes sense. You don't want to harm the fetus. It's annoying that we don't have that data. I hope we can get some more cells collected, but you can't do that. It won't pass an ethics board. But they won't test on women because of all of these parameters. It's too difficult. It's too awkward, despite the fact that we are half of the population. But the reason that most of us are still alive today is because of HeLa cells. HeLa cells were collected without consent, without knowledge, without reimbursement from a Black woman.
Yeah.
And she is the reason that most of us are alive, because of the different vaccines that we were able to generate from her cells. She is the reason that we're all alive. Without that, we all would have went through some sort of awful disease in childhood. So the reason that most of the population today is alive is because of a Black woman who did not give her consent for her cells to be taken. She was not reimbursed for it. Her family's been fighting to be reimbursed for it because they are in poverty in the US. And yet they were.
I say people are shit.
Yeah. But then one last thing I do want to say about this book, kind of touching on what Hannah had mentioned about Angela Saini's writing, I found this very readable. I found it fine. I took a quick look. If you're more like Hannah, this is the same. I think this is very scientific. It is constantly sending you to references in the back. If I find this here, all of this, which is approximately 80 pages, is references. and it's referencing basically just to. There's an occasional, like, Guardian articles and stuff, New York Times, but primarily it is actual academic articles. It is sending you to the webpage for them. So, like, it's every, like, 6 or 7 lines minimum that it's giving you another reference. So, like, heads up, it is scientific. If you're scientifically minded, if, like, that's kind of the route that you went down with your education, you'll have no issue with this. It's absolutely fine. If you're not scientifically minded, and if you're not used to that kind of style, this may be a little more difficult for you to read.
I think there is an audiobook on Scribd, though, if that helps with comprehension.
I will say I do know that it's not just me. This was recommended to me by one of my friends from my master's, who also is Swedish. So she's reading in her second language. And so she found this perfectly readable. So the language is absolutely fine. It very much is, are you scientifically minded or not? If you're not, this will take you longer to get through. Still worth it, in my opinion. I still think it's fine to read. It will just be slower. Just go in knowing that. But if you're scientifically minded, like I was flying through this. So
yeah, but you like a quick read, don't you, Abby? So
leave me alone.
Leanne, for context, our very first live show, the prompt was a quick read because it's January, and Abby recommended the Count of Monte Cristo as a quick read.
In my defense, I said for its size.
There's no difference.
I am coming from having the bestie who reads 200 plus books in a year, and I just feel inferior by association. So I understand this pain. Yeah.
Look, I was saying that for how big it physically is, you can read it a lot quicker than you would expect.
No.
Like, you see that book, like, that's going to take me 7 months. And then you read it and you're like, oh, it took me like 3 weeks.
If I have tequila, it will make it go faster.
Yeah,
Abby, just accept you are never living this down. Just accept it. And every single time I see a book that is nearly the same size as the Count of Monte Cristo, we will be sending you photos of it. And saying,
we have a group chat for like the base Total Bollix people, and she already does this.
Well,
I need them in the group chat just so I can also join in and pelting Abby in a kind and loving way.
In a kind of loving way.
I don't know.
That will make a change because these lot aren't kind and loving. So I'll take it.
Like, I actually get where you came from with it, but I think I'm still the one that's been sending the most.
It just kills me. Yeah, is the Bible a quick read?
Is it getting darker? Is that shade out there?
Yeah, that is. It killed me. So, like, Celine and I was in Waterstones, and they had, like, it was a table dedicated to, like, intimidating reads. And I think we just took a photo of the whole table. We were just like, Abby! She's a speedy reader.
I love you guys.
And I read a lot of classics. Yeah.
I
have been tempted to read the Bible. I have an edition of the Bible, which is ironically a lot smaller than my edition of the Count of Monte Cristo.
Lizzie's face.
Until you look at the font.
Yeah, imagine recommending the Bible on the Fuck the Patriarchy.
Can I just say, Abby, you're flexing so hard. I read so many classics.
I don't read that many classics. I just read a lot of big ones.
Oh,
Another interesting topic for Fuck the Patriarchy.
But yeah, I was given this when I left school because I went to a Church of England school. And it is sat on my shelves, unread, and I'm so tempted to read it just so that I can argue with those idiot Christians. Not the good Christians that like actually use scripture and they're like, here's the scripture, fuck your bullshit. But like the ones that are like, oh, because of this scripture, man should not lie with another man as he lies with a woman. And I'm like, bitch, that translation is meant for pedophiles.
Also, there is an entire this is definitely showing my age slightly. There is an entire scene in The West Wing where Jed Bartlett, a president who is distinctly not a businessman and who is like a scholar, takes apart a critic line by line where he's like, oh, so I'm not allowed to touch pigskin on this day, so should I ban football for the nation? And
I've not seen the film, but I've seen the scene.
Yeah.
So good.
That's why I want to read it. One, because it's just been sat on my TBR shelves since I was 8. Yeah. And two, because then I can use it for that.
Hey, Abby, just I got a better idea for you. Unhaul it.
I feel like I've never heard the sentence "unhaul the Bible."
And that's Total Bollix in a nutshell. You never know what you're going to hear, and it's always wild.
I should also clarify, I'm an atheist. Like, I went to a Church of England school.
Oh, are you? I didn't get that from the way you were talking about the Bible and the good Christians.
I can argue that the good Christians agree with me. Look, man. I was raised by a Church of Scotland mother in a Church of England school. I was not going to end up Christian.
How did we get from fuck the patriarchy to Christianity and the church?
Oh, the
also, that is a massive link.
It's a fairly straight road between the two, I feel. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm tired and I'm lost.
A lot of patriarchal issues come from Christianity and Catholicism. Catholicism.
I think you should call it Catholicism because that sounds better.
Yeah, it sounds so much better. But yeah, a lot of it comes from the churches. That's where a lot of the patriarchy comes from.
Yeah, I know. I'm just lost.
Lizzie's like, I'm too tired.
Lizzie looks like she's molded with her chair. She's now just become a chair person.
It's a circular chair as well, so she really does just like.
You are having a full Wizard of Oz moment there. It's your head instead of your feet. But, yeah.
It is a similar color, at least on the webcam.
Yeah, it is a similar color. Just
right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there so that Lizzie can go to bed. But I've really, really enjoyed talking anti-patriarchy stuff with you guys. So thank you all for joining me. And thank you, Leanne, for joining us. It's been a
Can
blast.
I come back? This has been great.
Oh my god, please do. Feel free. Next month, we're talking about high fantasy on Lizzie's channel. So you'd be more than welcome. More than welcome.
Made for me, yes, please.
And we'll get you in on that group chat too, so you can also roast Abby.
Love you, Abby.
So thank you everyone for watching. And yeah, we will see you next month. So I'm going to little wave, click end. Bye.